Thank you all for coming. We're really, I serve on staff here at Laureate. We're really grateful that they opened up this beautiful facility to us at no charge and as part of their outreach to the community. But Laureate provides psychiatric support to the community with an inpatient hospital and outpatient services. And in the last year or so, I've taken over a responsibility as a clinical director of outpatient services here and overseeing the therapists and psychologists and such. And that's been a great opportunity. I'd say I didn't get a raise because I think, and Drew was joking with me this morning. He said, "You'd be much better off to work part-time and just get paid by the hour." I said, but it's been really good. And one of the things that I've gotten to do as part of this job is to try and hire good folks to kind of for the next generation of folks here at Laureate. And one of the first people that I was able to hire was Drew. And on his professional card here, it's Andrew Duffy, but we all know him as Drew. Drew has his master's in clinical social work from Oklahoma University, OU, and he is also working toward his PhD in social work from Kentucky. But he's a very busy young man. He does. I tried to hire him. I tried to give him a $5,000 bonus to come to work for me full time, and he said yes. And then he said no. I really have a heart for reaching out to the community and for people who don't have access to services. And so he's kind of a visionary, coming up with ways to get to where people are hurting and needing. And so he's started a mental health wellness program at the downtown library where people congregate. And he's also done some several week-long educational things for the folks over at Believers Church and you guys. And so Drew is just a wonderful, bright, very talented young man, and we're really glad to have him. And he's going to tell you a little bit more maybe about himself, but he's really going to talk to us today about one of his areas of expertise, and that is trauma. Please welcome Andrew Duffy.
Okay, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here, and it's good to see your faces. I know for some of you this is probably really early. For me it was. Waking up before the sunrise is not something I normally do, so it was exciting to be here. Let's just jump in there. Let's get started. Who am I? My name is Andrew Duffy, or I go by Drew. I went to John Brown University for my undergrad, got my master's at OU Tulsa. I'm currently in my doctorate of social work program through the University of Kentucky. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also an internationally certified gambling counselor. And just on a personal note, I enjoy soccer, photography, writing, traveling, and lately procrastinating on homework. I'm getting really good at that procrastinating bit. I could probably go semi-pro pretty soon if I stick with it. So learning objectives today. Define trauma and identify common reactions to trauma. Learn how professional counseling attempts to help people who have suffered trauma, and then discuss the gospel in the church, how they can offer hope and identity for those recovering from trauma. So that's the goal. I just want to say before we jump into the content that I appreciate you being here. Our world can be very hard right now. And people are hurting, people have been through very difficult things, and the fact that you're here gives me hope. That you would spend your time, that you would get up early, that you would come here to try to learn how do we love those who have been through very hard and difficult times. So I just want to say sincerely, thank you. Thank you for being here. I hope that this will be a helpful time for you. So, when it comes to trauma, there's a couple different ways we can define it. One way is through a a more technical clinical definition. This is from the DSM-5, which is basically the textbook for counselors and the guide for how we diagnose and what goes into that. And the definition is exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. This can be for the person themselves or witnessing it or happening suddenly to a loved one. Now this definition, you might notice, it's very specific. It's a very kind of a high bar. If you don't fit into one of these exact things, you might think, well, maybe I haven't really suffered trauma. But there's another definition that I really appreciate. I first was exposed to this definition when I was training in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a type of trauma treatment. And that definition says this: anything that overwhelms our ability to cope. So let's just take a second to reflect on that. Trauma can be defined as anything that overwhelms our ability to cope. Those moments in our life that our brain just kind of stops. It doesn't know what to do with something. Maybe it kind of gets overwhelmed. So when we look at this definition of trauma, we see that that could include many more things than just death, serious injury, or sexual violence. This can be a single occurrence or the accumulation of small, repetitive, negative events. So one example of this I think of school bullying, right? Somebody calls you a name in middle school. Well, that might be traumatic to one person or maybe not to another person, but if that happens again and again and again over time, that can really overwhelm somebody's ability to handle it. The same thing with the last couple years for many people, right? COVID and all the changes that went in our society and all the shifts that were forced upon people. That doesn't fit the definition, the clinical definition of trauma, but we can say that for a lot of people, these last couple of years were traumatic to them. Right now we're passing out handouts that go through the slides as well. One last thing we'll say when defining trauma is that everyone experiences some traumatic moments in their life, but not everyone is traumatized. One's reaction to an event is very dependent on the person. And we're going to get into what people's responses and reactions to traumatic events are, but I think it's important to note right away that the person themselves defines whether or not something is traumatic to them. So two people could be in a car accident, same car accident. One person walk away and it just kind of brushes off them. They just keep going in life. The other person in the car, that might have been a traumatic incident. Maybe they had nightmares about it. Maybe they struggle with recovering from that scary experience. So, when we go forward in this presentation, I'd encourage you to think about both of these definitions, both the clinical one, but then the alternative one as well. I really hope I've made this presentation in a way that won't be too upsetting to anybody. We're going to stray away from stories of trauma specifically or going into details of things, but I also recognize that this can still be a difficult subject for people. And so if you need to take a break, if you need to go outside, if you need to take some time out, I encourage you to do that. I'd rather you take a break, go get some water, go to the bathroom, and come back in than to sit there and kind of just be, in turmoil in yourself, okay? So please note that's perfectly fine to do. Okay. When something happens, so some event or some occurrence overwhelms our ability to cope, whether this is bullying, a car wreck, being assaulted, whatever it is, there are common immediate responses that people go through. And the first one is to call for help. We're social beings, right? When something bad is happening to me, a lot of times our first reaction is to say, is anybody around? Can anybody help me? Hey, I need help over here. Come here, right? Now, if no one is there who can help you immediately, then the second response, a lot of times that our brain comes up with, is fight. So whatever the threat is, there's a threat coming at me, or there's a threat being presented in my life. Can I overcome it? Whether that is a situation at work, in your personal life, in your marriage, or maybe you're just walking through the neighborhood, right? And there's a little chihuahua who's yipping and starting to try to nip at your heels, right? Your brain starts to wonder, can I overcome this chihuahua attack? You know? Can I overpower it through my own strength? Let's say that you decide I can't. This chihuahua is a big chihuahua, and I can't overcome it through my physical strength. Well, the next response is flight. So if we can't call for help, nobody's around who can help us, we can't overcome a challenge, then the next thing our brain tries to do is run from it. Can I escape? Can I get out of the situation that I was in? Okay? Now, what if you can't overcome it and you can't get away? A lot of people have heard of fight and flight as a response to kind of survival situations, but there's more than just fight or flight. There's also freeze. And what freeze is, when you can't overcome something and you can't get away from it, sometimes our body, we freeze. Now this could be for a couple of different reasons. One reason could be that you're waiting for an opportunity. So you might be in a public setting and violence is happening and people freeze, and then they see their moment to get away, and then they take it. This could also be that your body freezes because it doesn't think it can get away, and so it tries to preserve all its energy and power into just surviving. And so in some cases of freezing, people will literally fall to the ground. Something traumatic will be happening, they'll become overwhelmed, and they'll fall to the ground. It's not because they're weak, it's because their brain has done this really quick mental math and has decided, I can't fight it, I can't get away, no one's coming to help, so the best thing I can do is just conserve all of my power, right? I'm just going to fall to the ground, I'm going to freeze, and hopefully I can just get through whatever is about to happen. This can also happen, the last way freezing can happen is mentally. Sometimes when somebody's going through something completely overwhelming or traumatic, they will mentally disconnect from their experience. This is also called disassociating. And when people do that, they can take a break from their body. Some people don't even remember a traumatic incident that occurred because in their efforts to protect themselves, their brain just said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go somewhere completely else while this traumatic thing is happening. And then we'll come back to ourselves afterwards. So we have call for help, fight, flight, freeze, and there's one more, appease. The research will also refer to this as fawning, or appease and please. Now, most of the time that I understand that this happens is in places of common or chronic trauma. Nobody's coming to help. Somebody can't fight the trauma that they're experiencing. They can't overcome it. They can't run from it. They maybe have tried to freeze. Maybe they tried just to make themselves as small as possible or just survive it, but it happens again. So what choice do they have? Well, one choice that they have is to try to appease whatever person or situation is hurting them. Maybe if I do exactly what they say, maybe if I actually act like I'm in this situation as well, I'm on their team, maybe they'll treat me better. Maybe I won't get as hurt. Maybe I won't get as scared. So we have call for help, fight, flight, freeze, and appease. These are all responses that people have in the moment to trauma, and it's important to recognize right away that these responses aren't on a hierarchy, right? It's not better necessarily to fight than to freeze. Our brains do some mental math in the moment, and they just come up with whatever's the best option we think to survive. A lot of times people can really judge themselves for having one response instead of another response. So it's good to know that it's just our brain choosing whichever one they think is the best chance it has to survive. We won't go too far into this, but I just want to say that trauma impacts not only our emotions and our thoughts, but also our body. There are real biochemical reactions to becoming overwhelmed or to become threatened or hurt. And these reactions change the way that our brain functions in that moment. this amygdala and hypothalamus, that little red box, is kind of associated with our survival responses. And when we get into that fight or flight survival mode, that part actually, okay, it's not working, but that part basically takes over. And the other parts of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of our brain that's responsible for thinking through consequences of our actions or making informed decisions. That part of our brain can actually shut off, basically. One analogy, one little demonstration I like to do with people is, imagine if my fist is a brain. And here in the middle of my fist is that amygdala, that hypothalamus, that survival center. And this part is responsible for making good decisions or thinking for consequences of my actions. When that warning system goes off, it's like the other parts basically shut off. It's like, This is a survival mode, and it's not until we get out of that survival situation or we're able to calm down our body that we're able to re-engage with our whole brain. Okay? So, when people go through a traumatic event, they have those initial responses, and then after that event, it's common for people to have the following symptoms. One symptom is intrusive thoughts. This could be nightmares. This could be the thoughts of the event just popping into their head. This also could be re-experiencing the event through flashbacks, feeling as if the event was happening again. Now, why does our brain do this? Well, our brain does this because it's actually trying to figure out how to make sense of that event that overwhelmed us in the moment. In the moment, we couldn't make sense of it, so our brain's going to say, here, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to bring it back up later. Okay? Which obviously can cause some problems also in our lives. But intrusive thoughts is one symptom. Avoidance is another symptom. People who've been through trauma often don't want to think about trauma. Because even though our brain keeps trying to bring it up, it's painful to think about. That trauma is recorded with all the raw sensory data of the moment. And so even though our brain is trying to bring it up with intrusive thoughts, another part of our brain is trying to push it down. And this is really at the nature of a lot of long-term trauma issues, because our brain's trying to bring something up and at the same time is trying to push it back down. And we can get caught in that. Avoidance could also look like avoiding people that remind you of the trauma, avoiding places, certain even conversations that are linked to that trauma in your brain. It could also look like people disappearing from community, avoiding things that they used to enjoy. Physical reactions. When somebody's been through trauma and that trauma is recorded in their brain with all of the emotional and all the physical sensations they were at the time, all their sights and smells and feelings, when that memory gets brought back up, it's common for people to re-experience it in their bodies, for their heart rate to go up, for their breathing to change. The physical sensations of trauma are being re-experienced in the now, even though it was in the past. And then lastly, a common kind of area of symptoms is changes in thoughts or mood. So this could look like depression. It could look like the way that you see the world has changed. This also could be irritability, being increasingly on edge. Or this could look like becoming chronically overwhelmed, raising the white flag, avoiding things, not being able to handle things that you used to be able to handle. So when we look at helping people, it's good to know that all of these can be symptoms of trauma. So especially if you see someone who's all of a sudden displaying these symptoms where maybe they had them in the past, that can be a clue of maybe something's happened in their life. Maybe something significant has happened in their life. One thing that our brain tries to do in the moment is it tries to make sense of what happened. In the absence of trying to being able to make complete sense of what happened in the moment, our brain comes up with a hypothesis, kind of like a working answer that we continue to develop throughout time. The question, how did this happen, is also associated with why, right? Or, who's to blame? And the most common person to blame is ourselves. I'm the cause. I'm the reason that something happened. Does anybody have an idea why this could be? Why would we blame ourselves for something that happened?
We got blamed as kids.
Maybe we got blamed by kids.
No, as kids.
As kids, right. Maybe we are used to people blaming us, and that's just the reaction that we have. It makes sense to us, right? That's a great reason. I think another reason is that if I blame myself, if I believe it's my fault that something happened, then guess who was in control? Me. Which means that if I was in control, I could stop it from happening again. So I think a lot of times blaming ourselves is a natural thought that we have in order for us to keep this idea that we are in charge and that we can protect ourselves in the future. Sometimes people blame other people, right? It's not my fault that happened, that's these people or that person. Maybe they changed the way that they understand people. People used to be trustworthy, but now I know that everyone's out to get you in the end. Or that nobody's going to be there for me. And then I also see people change a lot of their view of God. When you look at these things, what we believe about ourselves and about other people and about God, you realize that these are really core beliefs for how we interact with the world. And trauma has the potential to shift these core beliefs. So real quick, I just want to explain this idea of trauma triggers and how it works. And to do this, I'd like to just go over a hypothetical with you. Imagine that I'm walking. It was earlier this week, let's say Monday, when it was raining outside. I took a walk near my work at 71st and Yale, and I decided to cross the street. And when I crossed the street, a yellow Jeep came out and hit me, right? Now that could be a traumatic incident, right? That could cause a lot of physical harm to me. It could also be extremely scary. So, for this example, getting hit by a car is the trauma. Now, when this happens, our brain says, it comes up with that intermediary explanation, who's to blame, what's going on, but then it kind of files it away and it says, I've got to think about this more later. What kind of details might our brain connect back to that moment to try to remind us? Think of this like a Wikipedia page. Has anybody ever spent time on Wikipedia where you have all the hyperlinks, right? It's like you're reading an article, ooh, hyperlink over here to this article, hyperlink to this article. This is what our brain does in order to bring our attention back to the trauma so that we can figure out how to never be there again. So in this circumstance, one thing that our brain might hyperlink the trauma to is where it happened. So now, whenever I come to work, I'm no longer able to drive through 71st and Yale. If I drive by 71st and Yale, I start experiencing those physical symptoms of trauma again. What might be another detail of what I told you? Anybody have an idea?
Rain.
What'd you say?
Raining.
Raining, right? Yeah, rain. Maybe next time it's raining, I'm starting to get nervous. I don't like to be outside when it's raining. Now that doesn't completely make sense, right? But the thing is that has become a trauma trigger for triggering the thoughts and re-experiencing the things that I experienced in trauma. The type of car might be yellow Jeeps, right? Anytime I see a yellow Jeep, oh, I'm back in that moment. I'm re-experiencing what happened to me. Or even the month. People who have been through significant trauma, a lot of times anniversaries really matter to them. They might not explain why, but October rolls back around and they don't want to go anywhere, right? They just want to stay inside. They just want to be safe. They want to avoid people, you know? So just to review so far, a trauma happens and then we have an immediate response. Call for help, fight, flight, freeze, and appease. Then we start to experience symptoms, intruding thoughts, avoidance, physical reaction, changes in thoughts or mood. After that, we try to have these efforts to make sense of what happened. It begins in the moment, but it grows and solidifies over time. This leads to our changing of core beliefs about ourselves, about other people, about the future, and about God. So we've been talking about the problem of trauma, right? You can see that this would radically shift somebody's life. All of a sudden, the way they conceive about themselves, the world, or God is different. They're experiencing these physical sensations. They feel safer when they're avoiding anything related to that trauma. But what does it look like to heal? What does it look like to recover from it? So we talked about the problem, and I'd like to talk about what happens after the problem. And these steps of healing are primarily from the clinical side, I will say that, but they can also be employed not in a clinical setting. The first step is learning to feel safe again. Like we talked about it in the brain, if I'm constantly in this state of survival, I can't feel safe, and if I can't feel safe, I'm not going to be able to really interact with that memory, that traumatic memory. I'm not going to really be able to figure out, did I have any responsibility in that situation? Did I not have any responsibility in that situation? I'm not going to be able to figure out how to problem solve for the future so that I won't be in that situation again. So learning to feel safe is one of the first steps of trauma. Finding little moments to feel safe again. Little environments where I can feel safe that I can grow and build upon. The second thing is going to be engaging that memory. Can we actually hold this memory? This memory has become so spiky. You know, anytime we touch it, we can get overwhelmed. Can I find a place where I'm safe, that I can actually talk about what happened? I can think about it. I can write about it. And then if I can find that place, then I can fully process the events. And once I've fully processed the events of what has happened to me, once I'm able to make more sense of what was going on and what that means for my future or my relationships, then trauma is actually able to kind of be put and filed away in our brain without it constantly being brought back up. So these are the general stages that I follow, whether it's EMDR or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy. A lot of these therapy interventions follow the same steps. Can we help a person feel safe? Can we help a person be honest and talk about what happened to them? And then can we help them make sense of it and what that means for their life going forward? When we're able to do that, then we start to see signs of recovery. And signs of recovery from somebody who's been through a traumatic experience or multiple traumatic experiences is one, resumed normal patterns, right? These last couple months I've worked with people who've been seriously traumatized by violence that occurred here in Tulsa. And I'm excited to see that some of them are resuming normal patterns. For a while, they struggled going anywhere outside of the home. But now they're able to go back to the grocery store. Now they're able to hang out with friends. Now they're able to spend some time with their spouse not around. Resuming normal patterns is a sign that someone is recovering from trauma. Their reactions match their environment. One of these people that I've been working with, they were at their job and someone came around the corner just a little fast. They didn't expect them, and so they screamed and they fell to the ground, right? That reaction doesn't match the work environment, right? That's very disruptive to them and to their coworkers. But as they process through their trauma and as they've entered into this journey of healing, now they're still a little more jumpy than a normal person maybe, right? But they're not having these big traumatic reactions. Their reactions match their environment more. And then another sign of recovery is adapted beliefs. Adapted core beliefs. Maybe I believed before I went through a really hard time that God is good, therefore my life is always going to be good. Right? If God is good, then my life will always be good. But then I went through something that was extremely hard or scary or hurtful, and it overwhelmed me. And that core belief I had, that my life would always be good because God is good, that core belief was like made out of porcelain. It was pretty rigid and it worked. But when that trauma came and hit it, it shattered. And through that, we had an opportunity to rebuild our core beliefs. And now maybe my core belief isn't just that God is good, therefore my life will be good. But God is good, and I see his goodness by the way that he stays with me through the good and the bad times. Right? This is an adapted core belief that actually leads someone to be more resilient in their life. It can lead them to endure other hard times in a way that maybe won't send them into a spiral. Maybe a trauma happened because of a personal failure, or that's the way the person thinks about it. They made a choice that didn't turn out well, and they became overwhelmed as a response, and painful things happened in their life. Maybe their core belief before was, I'm a good person because I do good things, right? But maybe now they have to adjust how they think of themselves. I'm a good person, and I don't always have to be perfect, right? Or beliefs about other people. Maybe we grew up in a safe environment, so we thought that everybody was safe. Everyone is good inside, you know? And now we have the belief that most people are good inside, but I still got to stay on my guard, you know? I've got to listen to myself. These are adapted core beliefs about the way we view the world, and this can be a part of healing. And it can actually lead us to be stronger, more resilient people, because we know that the world is painful sometimes, and it's hurtful. Many of you in here, I'm not going to lecture you on this point because I know that many in here probably understand this much more than I do. But I will just say this, that the Bible is full of trauma. There's so much trauma in the Bible. If you've ever read the Old Testament, overwhelming things are happening all the time to Christians, or to believers in God, non-believers. I mean, lots of junk happens. I think it's really, really significant then that when Jesus comes and starts his ministry in Luke 4, he quotes Isaiah 61, which if you look at Isaiah 61, that whole chapter is about redemption. God taking things that are hurt and broken, full of mourning, and bringing them in to reconciliation with himself and beauty again. He takes broken cities and he repairs them, and he makes them into garden cities, and he takes our ashes and our mourning, and he gives us crowns of glory and joy for our day. So I just want to say that the Bible, I think, really is full of this. And even if you look at some of the questions that people ask Jesus, some of those questions are about traumatic things. And I really encourage you to look at his responses to them. One thing we have to ask ourselves, as people who are followers of God and who care about people, is my church a refuge? I don't have to go too far into this to know and for us all to agree that many churches, many religious environments are not safe places. I mean, if you just turn on the news, you hear about it all the time, right? The church is supposed to be a place that's an oasis in a world that's sometimes scary and hard and dry. And we want to be people who create that refuge for people coming in, the hurt and the broken. We don't want to be people who cause more pain. When I was thinking about this, I kept coming back to these graphics here. So what are some red flags maybe? Before we get into how do we help, we want to make sure that we're not hurting, first of all. So in your church or in your ministry or where you are in your life, here are some red flags that we can look out for about trauma. 1, avoiding talking about trauma. Does your church talk about hard things? Do you in your life talk about hard things? Or do you tend, whenever things get really messy or when people are talking about brokenness, do you tend to just kind of go around that issue? Just try to cover it up or avoid it? Because if you do, you might not be a safe place. And you might actually be reinforcing that person's avoidance of the trauma. You might be reinforcing these beliefs that they hold that, I'm too broken for other people. I've got to hide myself, or I've got to hide what I go through. So one red flag is we avoid talking about trauma or difficult things. A second red flag for a church environment or ministry or just in our lives is unclear reporting practices. Do people know how you will handle certain things in your church or in your families? If you come to me and say something, do you know that I will report that? If you come to me, that can help people feel safe. That can help set up good boundaries for people to know that if I say this, there will be an investigation. Another red flag is being quick to speak, to redirect, or to correct. I'm not saying there's never a spot for any of these things, but I think we see in the Bible that we should be slow to speak, right? And if somebody's coming to me with trauma and I'm trying to love somebody with trauma, that first thing that I need to do is help them feel safe again, right? How many people feel safe whenever people are just jumping on correcting you? Not very many people. And sometimes this can be because of our experience of somebody telling us trauma. Sometimes, even in my clinical practice, sometimes somebody's telling me something and I feel myself wanting to correct them or wanting to jump in there and just fix it, right? So then I don't have to feel that uncertainty. I don't have to sit in that pain. Because if I can just fix it, then I can feel good about it, right? I did my job. Oh yeah, I did a great job today, with that person. I really loved them well. But I want to encourage you to slow down. Slow down to make sure that that person is feeling safe. And if there's any talk about sins or anything like that, that it would come at the very, very end. And probably after they ask you about it, right? We don't have time to go into this idea of spiritual abuse, but it's becoming more and more in our culture. I had a friend the other day. It broke my heart. I'm just going to be honest with you. A friend that I grew up with, hadn't talked to them in a little while. I called them up and I said, hey, I'd love to hear about your life, just what you're up to nowadays. It's been a couple of years since we connected. And they said, Drew, I can't talk to you. And I said, well, what happened? Why can't you talk to me? And they said, because to me, you're connected with the church. And I can't. For my own mental health, I can't do anything related to the church right now. So thanks for reaching out, but I can't even have a relationship with you. Spiritual trauma is really real, and people are struggling with it. And our churches sometimes can be spiritually traumatic places. And so these are a couple red flags to look out for. Enforced accountability, using shame to try to shape behavior, suggesting that the abuser has a divine position, whether that's a pastor or a spouse, inability to question leadership, isolation as punishment, or using scripture to hide abuse. These are red flags, right? And the last red flag on the slide, that leadership has no consistent accountability or therapeutic support for themselves. If these things are going on in your community, I really encourage you, let's address them. We want to be safe places. We want to be places that are healing. And to do that, we have to address these issues. So let's move to how to help. Well, the first thing we want to do is just love people, right? When people are hurting, we want to love them. And, the love covers a multitude of sins. It covers a multitude of wrongs. I find that true whenever I'm trying to work with someone and help them, right? If they know that I love them, if they know that I care, if they know that I'm not just trying to fix them or get them to say a certain thing, that's really the key, So feel comforted. You don't have to know exactly what's happening. You don't have to have all this theoretical expertise. The main thing is, can we slow down enough to focus on the person and to love them through the hard time that they're going through? The second thing, create a safe place. Ask when and how a person would feel comfortable to talk. Right? So if someone says, I want to talk to you about this hard thing, or someone's been through a hard thing and you want to support them, how would you feel comfortable doing that? Would you feel comfortable meeting in an office, just me and you, so it's really private? Or would that be uncomfortable for you? Would you rather meet in a small group, 3 of us talking with you? Would you rather do it walking around outside? What would make you feel comfortable? Be slow to speak, slow to question, and slow to identify sins. I know most of you wouldn't do that, but it's sad that I have seen people jump to identifying sins after someone's talked about a trauma. I've experienced it in my life. One time I told somebody this story about something that overwhelmed me, and the first thing this person did, who was in ministry, the first thing they did was ask me, so where do you think we went wrong? What? You know? That was the beginning of the end of my relationship with that person. I wasn't safe with them. And so I couldn't process that event with them. I had to just get away. At least that's how it felt, you know. If we can, one reason I wanted to go over these concepts of trauma with you all is that if we can identify somebody's reactions within this survival response, whether it was fight, flight, freeze, appease, whatever it was, if we can help them understand that that was the way that they survived something, if we can help them understand that these trauma reactions that they're experiencing of avoidance or physical reactions or changes in mood or thoughts, if we can help them understand that that is a normal part of the process, that does a lot for helping people feel calm, for helping people feel hopeful. This is a simple step, but thanking someone for sharing, right? Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being brave to share this with somebody, right? That's a way to honor that step that they've taken towards healing, and it's a way to encourage them to continue to take steps. Sometimes when I don't know what to say, after someone's told me something really traumatic, really difficult, I'll just say, thank you for sharing. And then I'll just shut up. Because sometimes that's all people need. Sometimes they just need to know that somebody else knows. And that they're not going to change the way that they treat them. And that they're still going to be there for them, even after the conversation's over. Another thing is we can ask how to support them. I think this is really big. How do you want me to support you? Now that you've told me this, now that I've thanked you, what are you looking for from me? Is it just to tell me? Do you need encouragement? Do you want to pray about this? Do you want to look at what Scripture says about our identity or how God is through hard times? Do you want to do that stuff? Asking them, what do you want? I found that most people know what they need. And if they don't know what they need, do you know what happens a lot of times? I'll say, how can I help you in this? And if they don't know, they'll say, I don't know. How do you think you can help me? And then all of a sudden, I'm invited to help, right? I'm not just assuming I'm going to help them. I'm not just jumping in to fix them. I'm invited to help them process what does it look like to pursue and to recover being free and healthy again. So just a couple more slides here. We're doing great. When to refer. I would say definitely this is an idea of somebody could benefit from clinical interventions, from working with a counselor who's trained in trauma when it begins to impact their functioning, right? When they struggle maybe to go to work, or they struggle to maintain friendships, when they're starting to isolate or avoid more and more things that is impacting their functioning. In general, the earlier the better. If we can get people therapeutic support early after an event happened, then the quicker our brain can process that, the quicker we can adapt those core beliefs and move forward. The more time we spend just in this push and pull of trauma, the more time we spend kind of rehearsing these maybe maladaptive or unhealthy core beliefs about ourselves or God, the more it can get locked in, the harder it can be to kind of recover from those. So there's some people that if we can, even like the day after, if we can get them in to see a counselor or something, there's a good chance that we can actually reduce the way that trauma plays out long term. And then I'm a counselor, I'm a fan of counseling. I say refer them whenever you think it might help them, right? We don't have to have very specific, like, wait for this sign, right? If you're talking to someone, maybe say, hey, I've heard counseling can really help with this stuff. Would you be interested in doing that? I can walk with you. I can figure out how to get you into someone to talk to. Making sure that they feel safe and knowing that you're not just trying to hand them off or boot them out, right? You actually just want the best for them. And sometimes the best for them is them having a carved, set aside time for regular processing and working towards freedom. Some interventions when you're looking at a counselor, what kind of counselor, I don't even know what kind of counselor to refer someone to. Someone who's been trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or even there's a lot of research about body work, so trauma-informed yoga or dance therapy. If you can find somebody who, on their website or description, they are not only trained, but they're experienced in these things or credentialed in these things, then that can be really, really helpful. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who just think like, yeah, I can do trauma therapy, right? And it's just a real hit and miss thing. Maybe they can, and then again, maybe they might not be helpful. So I encourage you to do some research, and when I tell people who are trying to find a counselor, I say, hey, that first time you meet with the counselor, you're interviewing them too, right? Asking them, how do you think about this? How do you think we could get better? Like, in your head, how are you conceptualizing what I'm going through? And how are you going to help me pursue freedom and health again? So, encouraging people to ask those questions. So, 2 slides left here. Helpful things to remember. 1, the earlier the trauma, the more it shapes our core beliefs. This is why those early childhood traumas are really, really influential in people's lives. Because if you think about it, if I've had 40 years of positive, constructive, safe interactions with people, and then I have something traumatic happen to me that runs contrary to that, well, it still might shake me up a lot, but I can kind of balance it with all these other things that I've experienced in my life. If I haven't had all those experiences, then I might think that, oh, this is just how life is. People are going to hurt me. I'm not going to be safe places. I can't trust other people, right? So the earlier the trauma, the more it shapes our core belief. What is traumatic to one person may not be traumatic to another person. This is really good to remember. Some people come in and they've been very traumatized by maybe even something that you've been through, and you think you're fine. Let's focus on that person's experience of it and not on our own perception of how they should have responded or how we would have responded to it. People recover at different rates, but as long as they continue to take steps forward, they are on their way to freedom. This can be really important. Sometimes people get frustrated, but as long as we're taking steps, as long as we're pushing the boundaries of our little safe bubble, we're doing a good job and we're on our way. This is another thing we could really dive into, but trauma often gets diagnosed as ADHD, depression, or even spiritual backsliding, right? So if you're thinking of these things, maybe just kind of check in. What's influenced these thoughts in you? Maybe we need clinical help in these areas, or maybe there's something deeper, there's some deeper pains and hardships that are influencing people. I don't have a source for this. This isn't an official fact, but if you're doing couples counseling, one of them is experienced trauma. Just like, if you look at statistically, that's pretty statistically true, right? So if you're in a position of supporting couples and neither one of them has ever talked about something traumatic that they go through, maybe kind of just ask that question, Anything in your past influence these interactions? Because my guess is that is probably the yes. So last thing here. Vicarious trauma is also called secondary trauma. Helping people walk through trauma can be traumatic. People who are often helping people walk through the hardest times in their life, even if they're not going through those traumatic incidences, can actually start displaying the exact same symptoms as the people who have gone through the traumatic incidents themselves. And if we think about this, this makes sense, because if we go on under the definition that trauma is anything that overwhelms our ability to cope, it can be overwhelming sitting with someone who is hurting. It can be overwhelming hearing about the ways that people hurt each other or the tragedy that befalls people that we care about. So no matter how well you handle it, it takes a toll. Self-care is a must. So I just want to encourage you, many of us live very busy lives, right? We go from one thing to the next thing. We go from a hard conversation, and then we say, I've got to get to my next thing, right? But please, please know that if you're walking with people who have been through trauma and you're helping support them in this process of healing, that it will take a toll on you. And that's okay. That's not you being weak. That's not you doing something wrong. It's just that this kind of work and support takes a toll on people, so please take care of yourself too. Even if you don't feel it in the moment, it will catch up to you, right? And if we continually be aware of this and we try to take care of ourselves, then we try to protect ourselves from getting burnt out, right? We protect ourselves from compassion fatigue, getting irritable with people, and ourselves emotionally shutting down and having trauma symptoms. This is a phrase I heard, and I really loved it. Responsible to people, not for people. So when you're working and you're walking with people who've been through trauma, just something to think about, to keep in your head, is that you are not responsible for them. You are not responsible for their healing. You are not responsible for the outcome of that conversation. You are responsible to them. Responsible to love them. Responsible to try to create a safe place. But the Lord is the one who's responsible for them. The Lord is the one who brings healing. And we can trust Him. And we need to make sure that we're not taking on Jesus' role as Savior when we're working with people who are really hurting. Because none of us can do it. And so it's just a recipe for getting burnt out and tired and frustrated. Just some quick recommendations. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. This is a brilliant book. It's a little thick, just a warning. It's not too academic in its language, so most people can do it. It's just pretty thick. It's really good talking about how trauma impacts our bodies and how our bodies remember the things that we go through in our life and healing related to that. Tribe by Sebastian Junger. This isn't a clinical book, but I put it down just because I thought it was so interesting. This book, Junger is he was a wartime journalist, and he wrote a book about PTSD in community and how our community and our social support and things like that really impact whether or not somebody forms PTSD and how they recover from it. So pretty fascinating, easy read. And then last of all, PTSD Coach is a free app that you can get on your phone. It has so many resources in it. It has exercises. It has information. So that's just another resource that's out there that's for free for you all. And here's some references. Does anybody have any questions? Thanks for hanging in there. That was a lot of information you just went through. Yes?
Yes, I have one. I'm sorry, it's a little ways back.
No, you're okay.
Graphic where you had, like it was like, how did this happen? You had the person pointing to themselves,
Yeah.
outward, upward. Would you say that there's also a possibility that sometimes they point downward, like they blame it on just like an evil force and like the devil or just
the devil maybe do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Yeah. And I think the thing that we could watch out for in trauma is this. Does that person then feel like they can just be controlled at any moment by this evil force, right? That could be a really disempowering belief that person carries forward with them. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes.
I was going to ask you, have you ever dealt with clients where, like the part where you were talking about, sometimes like if they see a yellow car or whatever like that, an example that you were giving, like, do you ever bring your clients to that fear? Like, because I know there's ways that you can help them, but do you ever like like say if it was like a example, a yellow car and it's a Freemason, like do you ever bring your clients to go stare at a yellow car as a exercise to help them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some counselors do that. That's called in vivo training or in life training. It's where you actually go with the client out in the community to reenact with those trauma triggers and stuff to help them learn to feel safe. I don't do that personally. I a lot of times will do more imaginative trauma work through EMDR, so I'll have them imagine something like that, and then we'll work on helping them de-escalate in office. But yeah, that's a great tool for people who are able to do that kind of work. Yes?
Have there been any studies with hypnosis helping with trauma?
I'm not as familiar with that. I'm sure there are. I'm almost positive there are. I feel like most hypnosis-related studies are a couple decades ago. It was really popular a couple decades ago. I will say that, there are mechanics, EMDR, and some interventions associated with that is not hypnosis, but I think it uses some similar mechanics. Hypnosis, my understanding is originally the goal was to put people in a in a spot where they can be influenced, or a suggestible spot. That's not the goal of EMDR, but I think in some of the bilateral stimulation that occurs, there might be some kind of neuromechanical overlap between those things.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
So, just from what I gathered, maybe you're a Christian, and most of your core beliefs come from that, those adapted core beliefs. So when you're dealing with somebody who's been traumatized, but maybe they might not be like either Christians, maybe they have just different beliefs, very extreme beliefs from you, how do you help that person to build some resilience? Because you said there are people who might go through the same trauma, but they may not be experiencing, some of those traumatic, symptoms. So my question is about how do you build that, how do you help somebody to build that resilience, especially if they deepen their,
their core beliefs.
Yeah.
I think that's a part of the partnership. I work in a place that most of the time when I don't talk about my personal beliefs with the people, but I help them explore what they believe. My hope is always that they'll believe in Jesus, but in a therapeutic setting, I don't necessarily push that idea. And so I think that everyone can come up with beliefs about themselves, about other people, and about the world that can be adaptive and can create enough flexibility to handle difficult things in their life. But that can be a difficult thing as a believer sometimes, of knowing if they just believe this about themselves, Like one of my clients has really struggled with, after the trauma happened, they don't believe that they're worthy of anything. They believe that their worth has been really damaged. However, this client is not a Christian. And so they don't really believe actually that they have inherent worth. And so I had to sit down with them the other day, and I had to say, because they grew up in the church, they no longer believe those things, and I had to sit down with them the other day, and I said, I think either we have to get to a point where you believe in some inherent value in yourself, some inherent worth that you have, or we have to somehow just throw out the whole concept. We have to stop thinking about worth. We just have to get past it. Because right now you're stuck in a problem without a solution at all. So,
Yeah.
But I see that we're running out of time. I do just want to say that my hope is that as I work with people, even if I don't influence them to embrace the same core beliefs that I believe, my hope is that they will. And my hope is that if we can help people get out of this chronic fight or flight survival mode, that then they can start asking questions about, what is my purpose in life? What is a life that is meaningful and valuable? And my hope is then that they can be drawn towards the gospel and drawn towards a life that is full of hope and meaning for them. So that's how my faith plays out in my work. So, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Drew. That was a very big topic to try and tackle in 50, 55 minutes. That was wonderful. One of the things I just want to encourage you guys, you may not have Drew's training, but what you do have is you have the empowerment and presence of the Holy Spirit that goes with you, and just your presence with the Christ in you is something that you can bring to any traumatic situation. Listening, caring, and if they're coming to you as a minister, they're probably expecting you to share something in the way of hope or faith or whatever. And don't be afraid to share that, but take caution. Don't jump too soon to a fix. That healing happens over time, many times. So, and there are many other things that you bring to the table in the way of scripture and prayer, and again, what Drew said about you don't have to fix this. You've all experienced trauma, or you've been with people who've experienced trauma, and you know that it doesn't require an instantaneous fix. So we do appreciate you guys coming. A couple of announcements. One, there's the little evaluation form there that wasn't put in front of you. If you want to give us some feedback, we'll share that with Drew, but there's also a place for you to make recommendations about future topics, things that are like you think that your church or the community that you're a part of would like to know more about. Again, there's this little love offering envelope. If you do not feel obliged, we give these presentations freely to the community, but if you feel inclined to help with the breakfast costs or whatever, we welcome that, and you can just leave it on the table or put it in the back. There's a basket. Secondly, do you know what the 23rd of the 23rd is? That's the next Bright Tomorrow's Breakfast. February 23rd, 2023. So you're all going to remember that now, right? And so February 23 is the next time we'll be meeting together, Lord willing. And we do appreciate you guys coming out and look forward to seeing you then. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Go peace.